The scarred left hand was the only thing about Marcus Ellison that most people noticed first, and he had spent 23 years making peace with that. He settled into Seat 2A of American Airlines Flight 447, non-stop from Dallas, Fort Worth to New York's JFK, departing at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning when the tarmac was still slicked with the previous night's rain, and the sky above the terminal held the pale, washed color of old bone. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner was freshly configured, the first-class cabin smelling of the cleaning compound the ground crew used, something chemical and faintly floral, beneath which lingered the ghost of 100 previous journeys. Marcus wore a charcoal merino sweater, dark navy slacks, and shoes that were expensive enough to be quiet about it. No tie. He had not worn a tie voluntarily since his left shoulder had been reconstructed in Landstuhl, Germany, 14 years ago. He was 61 years old, which surprised people who looked at his face first rather than his hand. The face was still sharp, strong jaw going slightly soft at the hinge, deep-set eyes the color of dark amber, gray threading through close-cropped hair that had once been black as ink. There were lines around his eyes that had nothing to do with laughter and everything to do with decisions made at altitude, in darkness, under conditions that have no civilian equivalent. He moved through the jetway the way men move when they have spent years in spaces where careless movement gets people killed. Each step deliberate, weight shifted forward, head never fully still. The flight attendant who greeted him at the aircraft door, a woman named Denise with 20 years of the job written in the efficient grace of her movements, glanced at him once and straightened almost imperceptibly. Something in how he carried himself made people do that. He had stopped noticing it decades ago. He was traveling to New York to sign documents. That was all he would say if anyone asked, and no one would, because the kind of man Marcus Ellison had become did not invite casual conversation. The documents in question would finalize the acquisition of a 51% controlling stake in Transcontinental Air Holdings, the parent company of American Airlines' second-largest domestic competitor. Marcus had been building toward this for 11 years, through 3 failed bids, 2 recessions, 1 pandemic, and the particular kind of institutional skepticism that greets a black veteran from Fort Worth who shows up at investment bank meetings with a portfolio that doesn't match the face presenting it. He had a briefcase in the overhead bin. He had a still-sealed bottle of water in the seat pocket. He had a photograph in his wallet of a woman named Patricia, who had died in March, and whose voice he was still reaching for in the mornings before he remembered. He watched the pre-dawn ramp activity through the oval window luggage carts crisscrossing the wet asphalt, the fuel truck pulling back, a ground crew member in a high-visibility vest looking up at the sky with an expression Marcus recognized as professional assessment. He folded his right hand over his left, the scarred one, a habit as unconscious as breathing. His eyes were already closing when the boarding announcement crackled through the jetway, and the first passengers began to file past, dragging wheels across the gap, blinking in the cabin light. The flight attendant, Denise, was mid-row with a beverage order when the disturbance started at the boarding door. It was the sound first. A voice with the particular carrying quality of someone who had never once worried that their comfort might cost another person something. High and certain, with a locked jaw beneath it. The kind of voice that had been trained since childhood to expect immediate resolution of every inconvenience. I don't understand why the door agent couldn't resolve this. I specifically requested this row. Her name, as it appeared on the boarding pass she was brandishing at the gate agent who had made the unfortunate decision to reboard and assist her, was Diane Hollis. She was 54, though the precision of her grooming performed a negotiation with that number. Blonde highlights that cost more than most people's car payments, a blazer in cream boucle that Marcus's late wife would have identified as Chanel without needing to look at the label, and sunglasses pushed up onto her head despite being inside an aircraft at 6 in the morning. Her carry-on was a Rimowa aluminum roller, and she pulled it with a possessiveness that suggested it contained either critical documents or an irreplaceable sense of identity. She was not overweight or underweight. She occupied space with the confidence of someone accustomed to having more of it than she strictly needed. The gate agent, a young man named Thomas, whose lanyard still had the crispness of a new hire, was attempting to explain something in measured, careful syllables. Ms. Hollis, the seat you selected at booking is 2B. I know what I selected. I'm asking why that man is in 2A. She said that man the way someone points at a piece of furniture that has been placed incorrectly. Marcus, who had heard this from his seat with the acoustic clarity that the 787's relatively quiet cabin afforded, did not look up from the window. His hand remained folded over his left. His breathing did not change. Denise appeared from the galley. She had the kind of face that could perform warmth and authority simultaneously, a skill that takes years to develop and is more valuable than any professional credential. Ms. Hollis? I'm Denise, the senior flight attendant today. Can I help you find your seat? My seat is 2A. I always fly 2A. I have global elite status. Your reservation confirms 2B, which is, I don't fly in B seats. She said it the way one might say I don't eat from dumpsters, not angrily, but with the serenity of someone who considers the statement self-evidently reasonable. I'm claustrophobic and the window seat is non-negotiable. I know you're VP of Customer Experience, Greg Hollenbeck. We vacation in the same community in Telluride. Denise's expression did not change. Thomas's did, slightly at the corner of one eye. Marcus watched a raindrop trace a diagonal line down the oval window. I'm happy to see if any other window seats are available in first class, but 2A is currently occupied by another ticketed passenger in his confirmed. Then ask him to move. She said it to Denise but was looking at Marcus now with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who has decided a problem has a solution and the solution is sitting right there. He's in the aisle seat. He'd probably prefer the aisle, honestly. I'm just asking him to swap. Ma'am, Thomas said. Mr. Ellison is it that complicated? She stepped forward now, past Thomas, past Denise, and stood at the end of Marcus's armrest, addressing him directly for the first time. Her perfume arrived before her words. Something dense and aldehydic, department store French. Hi, I'm so sorry about this. I have a condition, okay? I physically cannot sit in a B seat. I need the window. Would you mind terribly just switching? You're right there at the aisle. It makes much more sense for. Marcus turned from the window. He looked at her. Just looked, without expression, without rushing, the way a man looks when he has spent decades in rooms where the first person to fill silence loses. The cabin was quiet now. A quiet that had expanded outward from their row as passengers in 3 and 4 pulled their earbuds out. A woman in 4 named Rita, 60-something, silver-haired, traveling with a carry-on full of knitting and a patient's understanding of the world's fundamental strangeness, watched over her reading glasses. Across the aisle in 3B, a young man named James, a consultant in a good suit, had put his phone face down on his tray table. In row 5, a mother named Carol had shifted her 7-year-old daughter slightly closer without being conscious of doing it. I'm fine where I am, Marcus said. His voice was quiet and unhurried and carried the kind of weight that has nothing to do with volume. Diane Hollis blinked. Her mouth arranged itself into a shape that was not quite a smile and not quite a grimace. Okay, I hear you, but I genuinely have a medical need. Then I'd suggest speaking with the crew. He returned his gaze to the window. The pause that followed lasted 4 seconds. Marcus knew because he counted them without meaning to, an old habit, a way of measuring fuses. When Diane Hollis spoke again, her voice had shed its approximation of pleasantness like a coat dropped on the floor. You know what? That's just rude. That's genuinely rude. I asked you politely, like an adult, and you just dismissed me. She was not quite shouting, but she had crossed some threshold. The other passengers could feel it, the way you feel a pressure change before weather arrives. I have a condition. I explained that. The least you could do is show some basic human decency. Denise stepped forward. Ms. Hollis, I need to ask you to take your seat. I'll take my seat when this is resolved. She turned back to Marcus, and something in her face had unlocked now. A flushed certainty, the particular confidence of a person who has never experienced a consequence that didn't eventually resolve in their favor. Why are you even in first class? Did someone upgrade you? Because I paid for this. The cabin took a collective breath and held it. It happened at the moment of leveling off. The seatbelt sign was still illuminated. They had reached cruising altitude over the Tennessee border, 31,000 feet. The sky outside Marcus's window a flat, brilliant blue that looked manufactured. When Diane Hollis stood up from 2B for the fourth time since takeoff. The first three had been to adjust her overhead bin, complain about the air nozzle, and request that Denise remake her coffee because it was, in her words, airport temperature. Each time, Denise had handled it with a grace that Marcus suspected cost her something she wouldn't get back. The fourth time, Diane stood with her coffee cup in her hand. She had been constructing something since the aircraft door closed. Marcus had felt it the way you feel a storm assembling out of clear sky, a series of small provocations accumulating into pressure. When she spoke from 2B, it was to Marcus's profile, to the side of his face turned toward the window. You know what I think? Her voice had the careful steadiness of someone who believes they are being reasonable. I think some people get places they don't belong and don't know how to act when someone with legitimate needs asks them for a basic courtesy. I think that's a character issue. Marcus said nothing. His hand remained folded. I'm just saying what everyone is thinking. She looked back at the rows behind her, as if taking attendance. Rita stared at her knitting. James studied his phone screen with the intensity of a man solving an urgent mathematical problem. The mother, Carol, met Diane's eyes for 1 second and looked away. The world works better when people understand their place. The phrase hung in the cabin air like the smell of something burning. Marcus turned from the window and looked at her, and this time Diane Hollis saw something in his face that she had not seen before. Not anger, which she had handled before, but something quieter and older and far more difficult to dismiss. He said evenly, "You should be careful with that sentence." "Excuse me?" The coffee cup tilted in her hand. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm not. Because I heard a threat. Denise," she raised her voice, "I need you to note that this passenger just threatened me." Denise appeared from the galley, moving quickly. "Ms. Hollis. He threatened me and I want it documented. I want his name and his seat number and I want to know what you're going to do about it. Ms. Hollis, please lower your..." "Don't tell me to lower my voice." And the cup came forward. It was not quite a throw. It was the motion of someone who has decided that a gesture will communicate what words have failed to. The arm swinging out from the shoulder in a wide arc, the lid not fully closed. The coffee, medium roast, 2 sugars, and Denise had remade it 10 minutes ago so it was still properly hot. Left the cup in a dark, spreading arc and landed across Marcus Ellison's left shoulder, his forearm, and the left side of his face. The sound it made was not dramatic. A wet slap. The quiet thud of an empty cup against the armrest. Then the second sound. The sound of the cabin, which had been holding its breath, letting it out all at once. The heat arrived like a second assault, delayed by half a heartbeat, the nerves in the scarred hand registering first, then the forearm, the neck, the cheek. Marcus did not flinch. He had been burned before in a way that made this a minor sensation by comparison, and the discipline it took to stay still was not even discipline anymore. It was architecture, built into him over 20 years of practice. His face did what faces do when they are under expert control. Nothing. He looked down at his hand. He looked at the liquid darkening the merino. He breathed, slowly, through the nose. "Oh my God!" Rita from fora, her voice barely above a whisper. James had risen from his seat by 3 inches before catching himself and sitting back down, hands flat on the tray table. Carol pulled her daughter fully into her side, covering the girl's far ear with her palm as if protecting her from a sound still coming. Diane Hollis was standing in the aisle, chest heaving, the empty cup still loose in her fingers, a high red color in both cheeks that was not embarrassment but the flush of someone who has done something large and is waiting to see if they can outrun it. "He provoked me," she said, to the cabin, to no one, to everyone. "You all saw that. He provoked me." Denise had reached the row. Her training was visible in her face now. Not calm, exactly, but organized, each response sequenced and ready. "Ms. Hollis, step back. Step back right now. He threatened me first. Step back." A flight attendant named Kevin had appeared from the forward galley and pressed the call button above row 1, and a moment later the cockpit intercom opened with a click that silenced every remaining conversation in the cabin. The captain's voice was measured and dry and left no interpretive space. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reyes. We are aware of a situation in the first-class cabin. The crew has full authority to manage it, and I am asking all passengers to remain seated with belts fastened. We will provide updates as needed. The seatbelt sign pulsed once, as if to punctuate it. Diane Hollis looked at the intercom speaker and appeared, for the first time, to understand that the situation had a size larger than her own. She looked at Marcus, and something shifted behind her eyes. I want to speak to the airline. I want to speak to someone in authority right now. Ma'am, said a voice from row 4. She turned. The man in 4B, who had been seated there since boarding without attracting any notice, a compact man in a gray sport coat with close-cut hair and the particular stillness of a person trained to be invisible in a crowd, stood up slowly and held open a credential wallet that bore the embossed seal of the Federal Aviation Administration and the badge of a commissioned federal air marshal. His name, embossed below the seal, was Gerald Tran. He had been watching since the boarding door. I need you to be seated, he said. It was not a request. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his soaked jacket. His right hand, the good one, moved without theatricality, without announcement, producing a business card that he set on the tray table. And then, from the same pocket, a second card. This one bore the seal of the United States Department of Transportation and his name, Marcus B. Ellison, beneath the title Senior Advisor, Aviation Policy Division, alongside a secondary line that read Board Member, Transcontinental Air Holdings. He did not show it to Diane Hollis. He showed it to Denise, who looked at it, looked at him, and then exhaled through her nose. A very small sound, but the only sound in the cabin. I've been trying, Thomas said from the back, mostly to himself. The revelation did not arrive with a thunderclap. It arrived the way true things do, in pieces, each one settling into place until the shape became undeniable. Denise spoke quietly to Marshal Tran, who spoke into a radio in the galley, who spoke to Captain Reyes, who made the second announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at Nashville International in approximately 22 minutes. Ground personnel are standing by. We appreciate your patience and apologize for the disruption. The cabin's collective exhale was audible. Marcus had accepted a wet towel from Kevin and was pressing it against the left side of his face. The burned cheek, with the methodical patience of someone who has applied first aid in conditions that make the current situation feel almost restful. He looked out the window at the flat Tennessee topography beginning to resolve itself below. His face finally showed something, not anger, not satisfaction, but a particular tiredness, the kind that accumulates over a lifetime of being underestimated by people whose imaginations stop at the surface of things. Diane Hollis had sat down. She had sat down because Marshal Tran had stood beside her until she did, and because the alternative was being removed from the seat by force, which even she understood was a Rubicon she had already gotten close enough to. She was staring at the back of the seat in front of her. The red had faded from her cheeks, replaced by a grayish pallor that was new. Ms. Hollis. Marcus turned toward her. He spoke without rancor, without theater, in the same measured register he used for board presentations and depositions and, once, for a congressional subcommittee on aviation safety. I want you to understand something, not because I expect it to change anything that's already happened, but because clarity seems useful. He paused, letting that settle. The acquisition I'm traveling to finalize this morning gives my consortium a controlling interest in the parent company of the airline on whose aircraft you just assaulted me. I also sit on the Federal Advisory Board that makes recommendations about aviation security protocols to the Department of Transportation. And I spent 23 years as a decorated officer in the United States Air Force, the last 11 of which I flew combat missions. He looked at his left hand, the scarred one, for a moment. I mention none of that because it makes what you did worse to me personally. I mention it because people like you often believe the person you're targeting has no standing. I want you to know that standing is not the point. You should not have done this to anyone on this aircraft. The cabin had not been quiet like this since before the doors closed. It was the quiet of people who have witnessed something and are processing whether it was real. Rita began to clap. It started as two uncertain strikes of palm against palm and then became something fuller, something that spread from row to row the way dawn spreads. Not everywhere at once, but inevitably. James joined it, Carol's daughter, 7 years old and entirely unburdened by ambiguity, clapped with both hands over her head and looked around to see if she was doing it right. Denise stood at the galley entrance and pressed both hands flat against her thighs, which was the closest she could come, professionally, to what her face was doing. The aircraft began its descent. Nashville Metro Police and 2 FAA security officers met the aircraft at the gate. There were also, present but hanging back, 2 men in business clothes whose credentials Marcus recognized from long experience as belonging to people who are technically from one federal agency but professionally available to several. Marshal Tran escorted Diane Hollis down the aisle. She walked it with the particular stiffness of someone trying to maintain the appearance of dignity past its departure point. She did not look at Marcus. She looked, once, at Denise, and opened her mouth, and Denise met her eyes with an expression that required no translation. She looked at Rita, who had resumed her knitting, the needles moving with the same unhurried rhythm as before. She looked at the 7-year-old girl who was watching her without malice, just with the frank curiosity of a child watching something unusual. A look that, from a child, contains a judgment more devastating than any adult's. When she crossed the threshold of the aircraft door, the cabin let out the last breath it had been holding. Carol's daughter tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she said, in the clear, carrying voice of a 7-year-old who hasn't yet learned that some questions are rhetorical. "Why did that lady throw coffee on that man?" "Because," Carol said, after a pause of the kind that indicates a parent doing real-time editing, "she made a mistake." "Is she in trouble?" "Yes, baby." "Good." Flight 447 departed Nashville 47 minutes later, and by the time it leveled off into a sky that had gone from gray to the hard, honest blue of a clear Tuesday at altitude, the cabin had remembered how to breathe. Marcus ordered nothing from the beverage service. He sat with the wet towel still loosely in his right hand, looking out at the geometry of clouds below, and thought about Patricia, who had always said that the view from above was the only one that told the whole truth, that from up here, the things people fight over on the ground looked like what they actually were. Arrangements, temporary ones, of no particular cosmic significance. He thought about the signing, at 2 p.m. at an attorney's office on Park Avenue. He thought about the 51%. He thought about a young man at a gate counter named Thomas, who had tried to say his name and been interrupted, and made a note to himself to find out Thomas's employee number through proper channels, and leave a commendation that would outlast whatever Diane Hollis's lawyers thought they could construct. 3 weeks later, the criminal complaint, case number 3:26-00147, Middle District of Tennessee, charged Diane Hollis with assault on a federal official and interference with a flight crew member, both federal felonies. The airline issued a statement confirming her permanent removal from all flights and a comprehensive review of first-class boarding protocols. Her photograph appeared in 4 newspapers, which is a different kind of first class entirely. Marcus Ellison flew home to Dallas the following Thursday, window seat, same airline, different aircraft. He watched the city drop away beneath him, the grid of streets and the glint of standing water and the particular brown-green palette of a Texas October, and felt the specific peace of a man who has done what he came to do and is going home. The scars on his left hand caught the afternoon light through the oval window, and for a moment they looked, if you were the kind of person who notices such things, almost like a map.